I know we're here today to focus on federal cybersecurity, but I think it's important to discuss the attack that we have just recently seen on Colonial Pipeline, one of the largest attacks on critical infrastructure in our history. Last month, Ranking Member Portman and I introduced the Cyber Response and Recovery Act, which would give the Secretary of Homeland Security the authority to declare a significant incident and use cyber response and recovery fund after events like this. I know you're familiar with the legislation that we've introduced. And while I understand it's too soon for this to talk about this in relation to this specific situation, we're still learning a lot about that, and we'll see the impact of that in the days and weeks ahead. But if you could answer the question is, how would this new authority enable CISA to provide more assistance during these types of incidents? And whether they occur on privately owned critical infrastructure or the federal systems. What's your assessment?
Sure, sir. And again, we think that this is an absolutely instrumental advancement in the country's ability to respond to significant and catastrophic cyber incidents. We have seen that our adversaries are increasingly focused on broad, significant campaigns that do not focus on any individual sector. They are not limited to just the government. And in the face of those broad campaigns, we want to ensure that we have the resources to surge our support, our incident response, and our prevention activities to the scale that they're needed. And in particular, the kinds of entities that most often come to CISA for assistance, state and local governments, small private sector companies that don't have the resources and organic skills to be able to respond to incidents of the scale and severity that we have seen. A cyber response and recovery fund will be essential in ensuring that we have those resources, we can expand our capacity, and we can support our ability to get ahead of catastrophic cyber incidents. So we are eager to continue working with Congress on the establishment and execution of such a fund.
Well, I appreciate the support of that legislation, and you talked about the additional resources from the fund. Could you be a little more specific to give folks a better appreciation as to how those funds would be used to help in situations like we've seen?
Sure. So I think there are a couple of different ways in which we would potentially use those funds. First is to ensure that we can expand and surge CISA's organic incident response teams, bringing in additional for example, contract resources to build out our cyber defense teams to allow us to go on site and assist potential victims. It'll be used to deploy additional sensors and technology at sites that we are responding to. It could also be used to reimburse other agencies for assistance. So there are times when we establish agreements with the Department of Defense to surge activities from the surge resources from U.S. Cyber Command and others. And right now, we have to take that out of our existing resources. We would have the CRF in the future to be able to reimburse those agencies for the assistance that they're providing on behalf of CISA to support our partners or the potential victims in the field.
Mr. Wells, SolarWinds was a critical cybersecurity incident because the sensitive information that was accessed, but also the widespread impact that it had all across the federal government as well as private sectors. FISMA, however, doesn't seem to account for this kind of widespread intrusion. From your perspective as the lead operational agency for federal cybersecurity, do you agree that we need to consider the scope of an incident, how many victims are affected, for example, when evaluating its severity?
Yes, and as a point of fact, we score incidents ourselves using a scoring schema that was part of the National Cyber Incident Response Plan. And one of the factors we look at as part of that is the scale and scope of the incident.
When you issued your SolarWinds emergency directive, you requested that every agency respond with details of their compromise to help determine both the number and the severity of which each of the different agencies were affected. Is that a correct reading of the directive?
Correct.
Why was it so important for CISA to understand the overall severity of the threat? If you could explain that for the committee, please.
Sure, and as I pointed out in my opening remarks, one of the lines of effort of CISA's work in partnership with the other UCG members like the FBI is understanding the scope of the incident, because that's going to help us ensure that we are providing support to the right places. We understand the objective of the adversary. We could look for potential compromises in places that has not yet been detected. And so it is instrumental in any of our additional cybersecurity work to understand exactly what happened.
So to Mr. Higgins and Ms. Vogel, clearly, the department's vary significantly in when and how they declare a major cyber incident and share information with Congress. And while I understand that early on you may not have known all of the details of the intrusion, a notification that says, quote, something happened, end of quote, without any additional details or context, quite frankly, prevents Congress from conducting effective oversight. The law governing this is FISMA, and while agencies may be meeting the letter of the law, they certainly are not meeting the intent of the law. So my question to both of you, do you believe that sending a notification to Congress simply saying that an intrusion into your agency's network occurred, but not providing any details, is sufficient for effective oversight? Mr. Higgins.
Chairman Peters, with regards to the Department of Commerce, when we encountered the incident, we took in consideration a few different things. The nature of the compromise. We took in consideration the systems and information involved. We also took in consideration the stakeholders and customers impacted. Given what we knew, and more importantly, what we did not know, we felt it more than appropriate to notify OMB and CISA and subsequently Congress of a major cybersecurity incident. It's important to note that given the moment, you're not going to have all the information that you need, but we're going to have enough information to share that with CISA and others to prevent any further spreading of malicious activity. So with respect to commerce, it's important that we're transparent and upfront with what we know and what we don't know as soon as we can, so that all bodies involved can make requisite decisions and take the necessary action.
Yeah, absolutely. Ms. Vogel?
Yes, thank you, Chairman Peters. When we received notice and the details of an incident, we were able to respond very quickly with an assessment of whether we had been compromised and the impact of that. As we looked at the impact against the criteria, we felt that we had not lost any data. We had also firewalled everything appropriately, that there wouldn't be follow-up activity. And so we also, we determined right away we did not believe this was a major incident. Certainly a very sophisticated and complicated event, but we confirmed with CISA and also our OMB desk officer our determination that we would not declare a major incident at that time. Again, if we had received more information, if we had gotten other signs of activity, we would have revisited that decision right away, and we would have conferred with the CISA, who have details that they could share with us about what was going on in other departments.
We certainly do not have infinite resources, and we need to evaluate the risk facing our most sensitive system, which continue to fall victim to these attacks, as we've talked about throughout this hearing. As Ranking Member Portman brought up, we've got at least 2 cabinet secretaries that were targeted. So my question is first to Ms. Vogel. How does HHS assess its risk posture to cyber attacks? And then how do you allocate resources against those risks?
Thank you for the question. When it comes to risk, one of the things that we become very engaged in is our Enterprise Risk Management Council, where we bring different risks together, and then we're able to balance them and look at what we can all do from different disciplines on protecting the department. When we look at our risk, we have a risk score that we look through all of the regulations, and we apply our current assessment of our activities against that. This is a continually changing environment, and we have to go back to that time and time again. So as we look at this, some of the things that we recognize is, for example, in the past where we looked very strongly towards penetration testing to protect us at the perimeter, we're now looking more internally to see through threat hunting teams how we can think ahead and be creative, because we know our adversaries are doing that. So as we look at that, we are slightly shifting some of our resources, and we're looking at what we can do more towards identity and access and restricting to go towards more of a zero trust type of environment. That, and in addition, we're trying to balance the operational technology with the business technology. So one won't necessarily work without the other, but we're also trying to protect it system by system, environment by environment. Those are some of the things that we're doing right now. And we're doing quite a bit of outreach and education because we feel that our employees are our first protection. They'll notice things and report things. We're trying to get them on board and not think of cybersecurity as something separate or something somebody else is supposed to do. So as we incorporate that in our work environment, we're also trying to balance the risk. That gives us a lot more coverage. And those are some of the things that we're doing now.
So those are within the department. Kind of a follow-up question to that is, how does some of the recent supply chain compromises of federal vendors that we have seen, how does that change your risk assessment, and how dynamic is that?
We take that very seriously. One of the major risks that we've addressed as a department recently is acquisition, and looking at upfront what we can do to build in that prevention based on supply chain needs. We also have an area that looks just at medical devices and keeping them up to date and making sure that we share enough information with the healthcare community that they can be as protected at their end as possible. So we look internally and we look externally.
Mr. Wales, I would certainly hope that CISA, as the lead operational agency for federal cybersecurity, that you would have a real comprehensive understanding of the cybersecurity risk across the entire federal government, each of the component parts of that. So my question is, and please be very frank, do you have the insight that you need into every agency's risk posture to form that kind of comprehensive understanding right now?
No.
So what do you need? What should this committee focus on to give you the tools necessary to have that kind of comprehensive understanding, which is clearly necessary?
So I think this is an area where to set expectations about our ability to fully understand the risk profile at 102 different federal civilian executive branch agencies, including some large complex agencies with multiple subcomponents like the ones I'm testifying with today. Fully understanding their risk environment is going to be challenging. They'll use a variety of different systems. Those systems will have various different functions, and understanding the importance of those different functions, what happens if there's a disruption, is always going to be a challenge, regardless of the level of insight we need, the level of insight we have. That being said, I think that there are critical improvements that we want to have, many of which we are already starting based upon the resources in the American Rescue Plan Act, based upon new authorities that we've had provided to us to expand our ability to understand the cybersecurity posture of our federal partners and where critical improvements are needed. And I think I want to start there and then build on that base. And while, a full understanding of the risk profile of every federal agency and its sub-elements might be a goal in the future, we've got some shorter-term goals that I think we need to achieve first.
Well, very good. Well, you can count on, as a committee, working closely with you and all of our agencies to make sure we get to the place where we need to be. So I want to take this opportunity to thank, again, our witnesses for testifying here this morning. I think we can all agree on our reliance on cyber infrastructure makes cybersecurity a higher priority, and it's a higher priority each and every passing year. 2021 started with the solar winds, and the incidents have just continued to occur. I think we've heard some very interesting things here today as we continue to work on this topic in the weeks, months, and years ahead. FISMA clearly needs some adjustments to ensure agencies and CISA have the information necessary to understand our risk and allocate our resources to address those risks that have been identified. The law needs to reflect the intent of Congress, so there is no ambiguity, so there's no confusion on when and if an agency needs to declare a major incident and notify Congress about those events. We need to do this by evaluating the scale and the scope of an attack as well as the impact on an individual agency. What we heard today, I think, makes clear that to combat today's cyber enemies, we must work as one holistic federal unit. Our enemies' increased sophistication during the SolarWinds cyber incident and continued willingness to inflict harm on Americans, as witnessed during this weekend's ransomware attack on Colonial Pipeline, shows that cybersecurity is and is going to remain a national security priority for the foreseeable future. This committee will continue to investigate the scope of these recent incidents, and we're going to work to address the risk and challenges that are critical to helping modernize cyber infrastructure. That includes ensuring our government is prepared to respond efficiently and effectively during a major cyber incident. This committee is also committed to addressing the cyber workforce issues facing the government, as several members discussed during their questions. This is something that I've worked on and want to continue to work very closely with the administration to get done. So again, thank you to all of our witnesses, Ranking Member Portman and other members of the committee. And with that, the hearing record will remain open for 15 days until May 26th at 5 p.m. for the submissions of statements and questions for the record. This hearing is now adjourned.